So glad you could join us tonight. I'm Chris Brest, Planning Director, and I'd like to welcome you to the kickoff meeting, the design kickoff meeting for the North Common Main Street Parking Lot Project. I have with me tonight a number of illustrious people, Jean Bollinger and Mike Easler from Weston and Sampson. They're the design consultants for us. We also have Alan Snow, our tree warden, Jeff Kravitz, Economic Development Director. Then we have members of the LSSE Commission, Nate Buddington and Sarah Marshall. And we have Barbara Bills from the LSSE. She's the Director of the Leisure Services. I'm not going to try to say exactly what that is, but and Paul Dethier from DPW. And we're so pleased that you could be here. Maureen Pollock is going to take notes for us tonight. She's our associate planner. So I'm a little wondering where members of the Historical Commission are tonight. They were invited, but they're not here. So I hope that they will come, but we'll get started anyway. Okay, so I just wanted to give a few introductory remarks about where we have been, because this project has been a long time coming. As some of you know, we started this back in 2013, and so we've been working on it for at least 5 years. I think we were actually working on it before then. So this slide here shows the North Common, and it is a really beautiful green place. And it's surrounded by parking lots on either side, but they're very useful parking lots, particularly the one on the south side, which is used by the farmers market. Why isn't this moving? You need to make it move? There we go. Okay, so this is an aerial view of the North Common, and the red roofed building is Town Hall. That's where we are right now. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is an overview of the history of the North Common and of this project in particular. Review goals and comments from the previous meetings of 2013, 14, and 15. Meet Weston and Sampson, our landscape architects, and talk about existing conditions, conceptual design, and the schedule for the project. The history of the town common is quite interesting. It's very old. It's as old as Amherst. The town common is part of the road right-of-way, and it's not actually part of a piece of property. The select board has jurisdiction over the town common, and other boards and committees chime in from time to time with regard to maintenance and planning. It's an original historic common, and it's not a park. This is a plan that was developed by Frederick Law Olmsted in 1874. He had a very sort of Beaux-Arts view of the North Common with a lot of flowing lines and curving roadways and pathways. The area in red to the left is the area that we're going to be focusing on tonight. And it is quite different from the way the common looks now. We have another plan from 1986 that the Conway School of Landscape Design did, and this is a very minimal plan. They proposed planting a few trees around the edge and adding a diagonal path from the northwest to the southeast, and otherwise leaving it pretty much alone. This is a picture of the common from sometime in the 1800s. I don't know exactly when, but it's interesting because the common is lined with trees on the west and east sides, and it's also surrounded by a fence, which leads me to believe that there might have actually been animals grazing here as of that time. This is a picture from the mid-century, 1900s, probably sometime in the 40s or 50s, showing the curving paths. They don't exactly follow the pattern that Frederick Law Olmsted wanted to establish, but they give the same kind of flavor. And here is the beginning of the Main Street parking lot. So you can see that the north bay of parking is there, and there was a roadway coming in behind. And this, you can see in this picture, one of the elm trees that used to be on the town common. So the budget for this project, we're very lucky and happy to know that we have about $1 million to do this project. Hopefully it will cover everything that we want to do. We got two years worth of CPA grants for historical preservation and for recreation. And then this past town meeting voted to spend $450,000, to borrow $450,000, which is going to be paid back by the Transportation Fund. So the total is $1 million. Comments from prior public meetings. The North Common is a destination, and it's the heart of our downtown. People want us to make improvements that will last and want us to think long-term about this. Keep the Common green. And trees are very important. Include the parking lot in the project. Create a gathering space and include art and sculpture. Fix the drainage and erosion problems, which are pretty severe. Consider long-term maintenance when we're planning for the Common, and add seating areas and benches. Create a place for children and families, whether that's a little play area or just a place where children can enjoy themselves. Improve tree care, improve accessibility, and add lighting for nighttime. And now I would like to turn it over to Mike and Jean, who will give you their view of the Common.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much. Can everybody hear okay using this microphone? It's terrific to be here tonight, and we're going to try to keep this presentation on a pretty brisk pace because we really see this as our introduction to you folks who represent the various commissions and boards and the community itself. And we really see this as an opportunity for us to listen and to get your great thoughts and comments about this really important public open space asset, which is, of course, the North Common area of Amherst Common. Chris did a great job of introducing all of the players that are here this evening. She continues to be the primary resource for the project on a going forward basis. Mike and I are here this evening. Farah is also working with us on our project team back in the office. She is not actually here this evening, but you'll see her face at future meetings. And we're going to skip through this title slide as well. And, think in terms of what the starting point is. And as Chris mentioned, the project's had a life of 4 or 5 years already. And there's been a lot of good information that's been exchanged. And it's not such an enormous property that one can't have a pretty good understanding of what's at play out there by just spending a few hours out there over the course of a month or a year, or so on and so forth. So, but as you're thinking about reimagining this place, and it's probably not a total reimagination, but it is certainly a significant upgrade, and I think that's why we're all here tonight, because we know that that space can honor its history, but can perform at a much higher level for the community and accommodate a wider range of uses in a way that's much more comfortable. So we certainly honor the foresight of our ancestors, as Chris mentioned. The space itself goes back to the origins of the community. There is an interesting history of the property, and maybe there's an opportunity to tell a little bit about that unique history of this property through an interpretive sort of program that could be integrated into this space. The space itself is really great. When you have a protected green space, an open space, a common space like this, it's really precious. And I think this is really important. We have a graphic that might speak to this a little bit, but we've got about 37,000 square feet that make up the North Common. And we've probably got a couple of acres of hardscape that actually surround it in the form of the parking lot to the north and to the south, and to the public right-of-way that's to the west and to the east, and so on and so forth. So it's this bit of really important green space in the heart of your downtown area. The surroundings themselves are really inspiring in many ways. The architecture of the town hall, the church, many of the commercial buildings that Chris showed some images from that I think probably were the early 19th century, because I saw horse and buggies in some of those images. And those buildings are still there, and they're great and awesome. And why not play up, some of the connections and the views and vistas to these great surrounds. Clearly, some of the trees are really significant, and an essential part of this space, and we want to honor them. The terrain, it's interesting and challenging, but let's find some ways to actually make that terrain work for us, and to create some interesting opportunity for interaction on this space that recognizes the relatively steep gradient from a northwest to southeast orientation. And then opportunities, create a more sustainable landscape, create space that inspires well-integrated design, and one that's grounded on this site. So it honors the common space to the south, but it's also grounded in itself, and it's not perhaps a wildly dramatic departure from what makes the essence of that space at present. But we do think, working with you, we can come up with some innovative ideas to make this place look and feel different while still honoring what we've been discussing. Accommodate formal and informal users. We were out early. It was actually a little bit warm in the sun, and people were seeking shade from the trees. When we arrived on the scene this evening, there were 12 people out there. And I would say from the age of 2 to someone who was probably more senior than me. So there was a wide range of ages that were represented out there. And they were enjoying the space in a very much passive way at that moment, although a couple of kids were trying to make their own innovative play within a space that doesn't really have any formal amenities in that regard. Obviously, logical pedestrian connections. So it's a place to gather and to hang out and to read a book and to congregate and to interact, but it's also a connector. And people want to make their way through green space, perhaps, rather than around the edges where you're more in the urban fray. So we want to recognize that people simply want to pass through the space going from here to there. We mentioned the stronger connections between the North Common and open spaces, businesses, and institutions, mitigate the surrounding roadway fray and parking lot fray, improve views into the property and from the property to beyond, are different things that we see as opportunities. We're actually going to skip this slide, and as we wrap up and turn it over to Q&A, we'll just spend a moment on what the next steps are. So, Michael?
Thanks, Gene. As mentioned before, the North Common and the Main Street parking lot really sit in the center of so much that's happening in Amherst. University of Massachusetts is to the northwest, Amherst College is to the southeast. It's kind of at the southern end of the central commercial district. And basically, if anyone comes to Amherst, they're going to drive by, they're going to drive through, they might walk through. It's kind of a heart within the city, even for the Common. Even though the Common stretches a ways to the south, the North Common is very much the kind of central point for all of that. Just to give you a quick overview of the Common today, I think you all know it as you walked and saw it on the way in, but there's very much the parking lot and a lot of paved space at the very north end of the site, as well as the beginnings of the parking lot and the farmers market area to the south. In the middle, there's this beautiful oasis of green, and what we see there is a lot of opportunities for site movement. So today, there's a lot of people moving.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I've heard from the audience that they need you to speak up.
Oh, sorry. Sure.
It's really close home.
Absolutely.
Close to your. Thank you.
So site movement on the site. Currently, a lot of people traveling through the Common and the parking lot are working along Main Street. There's movement along Spring Street as well and along the edges. There's some formal movement along the current pathways, and there's a lot of informal movement, desire lines where people are moving from the corner of South Pleasant and Main to Spring Street on the diagonal down the slope. And there's a lot of people wanting to move through the parking lot as well. In its current orientation and layout, it actually becomes a bit of a barrier for people wanting to get into the Common itself. Next slide, please. Looking at the physical conditions of the site, in solid yellow, you see some of the degraded pavement. If you've walked out there, there'll be some pictures. A lot of it is bituminous asphalt that has chipped and degraded, as well as some cement, concrete, and pavers along the parking lot, also in poor condition. And we also see kind of a perfect storm of three major conditions that are working to create less than ideal conditions for people and for users of the space, as well as for the trees on the space. That is wear and erosion, so people's movements off of pathways, steep slopes, and deep shade from the mature linden tree and mature Norway maple tree. And that's creating kind of a central section, again, northwest to southeast, where you're seeing a lot of erosion and degrading and deteriorating conditions. So that's something that we definitely need to address. Next, please. In terms of experiential conditions, however, you're in this space that's only 8/10 of an acre, including the parking lot. But the experience goes to the buildings outside. The town hall is inspiring, the church is inspiring. You have these historic buildings to the west and to the north that are inspiring, or at least interesting. The intersection at Amityville and South Pleasant is a little uncomfortable, and that's something that we can mitigate. But that's also the most visible point on the site. That's the corner where the peace vigils are held. That's where the memorials are held. That's the most public space already being used, even if it's not formally designed to really, encourage that to happen. There's also some great views and views that we could improve. There's views into the park from any direction. I'm sorry, I said park, it's the Common. And there's some beautiful views out of the Common in most directions, and those are things that we can play up, we can work with to really highlight some of the gorgeous connections on a larger scale. There's also, back a little bit, there's a experiential barrier that you feel being surrounded by so much parking and roadways. To the south and to the east, Boltwood is kind of a calm street, and the parking lot on Spring Street is a parking lot, but it's not a huge barrier visually and experientially to the rest of the Common, whereas the busy road on South Pleasant and Main becomes a very strong experiential barrier to people inside the space, and that's only increased with the current layout orientation of the north parking lot. All right, a couple of pictures. Here you can see the wood chips that were put down to help mitigate some of the erosion. Again, that's occurring because of the slopes and the shade and the desire to walk across the site from the highest point to the lowest point directly. There's a lot of existing infrastructure and conditions that are forgotten out there. You can see here some of the pavement issues, as well as the no longer visible temperance fountain, which is a very interesting piece of the history on site. And again, just uncomfortable spaces, worn conditions, a lot of desire paths. So along South Pleasant, it's a very narrow sidewalk for a major connection if people are not walking along the business side. By the parking lot, we've heard that it's a town hall pastime to watch people run the curb with their cars. So there's definitely some improvements to the design in that space as well. And then there's just aging and abandoned infrastructure. The Mary Maple lighting is a huge draw to the space in the wintertime, we've heard. And that's something that we want to embrace, and that needs to be embraced year-round and not just when the lights are on. And there's a lot of abandoned stormwater infrastructure that we can improve upon, both visibly with above-ground collection, retention, infiltration zones, as well as an improved underground infrastructure to mitigate all of the erosion that we're currently seeing on site. So in terms of people who are using the Common right now, residents, obviously, families we saw tonight, students, tourists, the local businesses, both directly surrounding and off-site. We have the farmers market, and there's a chance for more here, so I added an S on purpose. There's a chance to expand the farmers market as well. There's the weekly peace vigils. There's Memorial Day and Veterans Day ceremonies, holiday ceremonies. There's small and medium scale town hall events, flag raisings, and others, which we'd like to hear from you tonight. And speaking of users, here are the pictures of the people using it tonight, enjoying the shade. It's a little dark on the screen here, but you can see 2 children playing on the border around the Norway maple, and some families resting on the few benches that do exist on site currently. So, we're really, at this point, not presenting a design to you. We're here for input, but we wanted to give you guys some ideas of how we're starting to think about the space. So one option here was to really kind of band it out into a civic band, a formal gathering space, and an informal passive area. So in the top left corner, or the northwest corner, you see what we're suggesting might be a space for large civic events. This would be the peace vigils, this would be Memorial Days events, any other types of public gathering. And that could actually include a secondary space towards Town Hall, almost a front porch to Town Hall where people could have medium scale civic events. I know in Amherst there would be no such thing as protests, but I think that would be a great place to have a civil discourse. Working down the slope and into the center of the space, you have this nice shady area where people would like to gather. And this could be a place where you could have medium to small groups, 5 to 10 to 15 people coming together to relax or have a family picnic or work out from there. And then the passive zone would be the least touched, most green, and most individually comfortable for groups of 1 to 2. And then the other thing you see here is an idea of how people can move through the space. And the biggest move is the one that you see from northwest to southeast. And to make that an accessible route, we would have to do a little bit of winding. So we'd be designing and integrating spaces that accommodated movement through and movement to along that pathway. And the second one here is very much a play off the first, but here we start to think about maybe adding more formal space for gatherings with the farmers market. So creating almost a sunny gathering space just north of the Spring Street parking lot. The formal and informal gathering zones might shift a little bit towards Town Hall. The larger civic space, again, likes to locate itself near that corner where it's very visible. But there's tons of options, and that's why we're here, to hear what you guys think about what you'd like to see happening, where you'd like to see it happen. And just a couple of precedents. These are both projects that we've worked on as a team before. Worcester Common was one that is done. My office is actually above on the right there, so you can't quite see it. But and here you have a great mix of small-scale gathering spaces. You can see on the top right, here's a civic monument to the Civil War. Beyond that, there's a comfortable pathway with lots of seating along the edges for small groups. And then towards the center oval, you have a place where you can have larger group gatherings. In the city of Worcester's case, they have the more formal protests on the other side of City Hall, and on the back side, they use it more as a gathering space. So picnicking, lunches, events, food trucks. And then in the wintertime there, they do a skating rink. Probably a little tough on this site, so I'm not suggesting that. But we'd love to hear from you guys. I think I've said most of this. It's public, it's downtown, it's got movable furniture for people to create some of their own gathering spaces. It has a very well-developed open tree canopy, as well as sunny lawn spaces for people to use. It gives them the choice. And there's a lot of informal uses that are supported within the formal spaces. The second precedent is Boston Common. In this case, we kind of focused on Brewer Fountain and the area around that. Our company did not design the development of Brewer Fountain itself, but we've done a lot of work around it. And here you see the same thing. You see a formal space that allows for informal uses. There's open sunny spaces as well as open shady spaces, and a lot of public gathering that can occur there at any scale. I think I've covered this slide as well. So really that brings us to the schedule and the next steps, and I'll let Jean talk about that.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. This is the last slide, actually, and then we'll go over to public comment. So we presented really a couple of concept diagrams, if you will, and just to get people thinking about this and get some reactions. When we come back later in June, we will come back with a couple or three actual schematic designs based on the sort of input that we get from folks tonight, and then vet those and allow people to chime in on that. I realized in looking at Worcester Common, we actually selected some spaces that were much larger than what we're talking about and much less intimate. The point is, in Boston Common is 48 acres, and Worcester Common is probably 6 or 8 acres because it runs an entire city block. But the point is there are more intimate spaces within those larger footprints. And in conjunction with the schematic designs, we'll have some precedent images of smaller scale places that read with lots more green space as well. So in regard to the next steps, tonight is really an important step. It's a first step. It's our first interaction with the community and an opportunity for us to hear you. But then, as I mentioned, we'd look to come back to a very similar format, a venue, to present the schematic designs for people's reactions. And then a preferred design being reached probably a month or so after that time frame, maybe 4 to 6 weeks or so. Feedback is incorporated from that interaction, and the preferred plan gets presented to the select board, which makes a recommendation on the final preferred plan to be implemented. And construction documents get developed in the fall. That's more of a technical exercise where really all the issues surrounding terrain stability and stormwater management and so forth get resolved and worked through. The project gets bid early next year, with construction beginning when the weather becomes nice next spring, with a conclusion of the project next fall. So that's the basic timeline, and there might be some plus or minus to that timeline. But I think the point is, and it should feel a little bit different this time around, is that the money's encumbered, and the town is extremely focused on implementing this project. So it's not going to be another 3 or 4 years past tonight. And what's the next slide? Is it just a thank you slide and questions and comments? So I think what we would like to do now is really just open this meeting up for questions and comments and all of your great thoughts. And the microphone seems to be working at a much different level now, so you may not have to put it quite as close as you did before.
So Jean is going to be the MC, and I will be the person who passes around the microphone, and Maureen is going to take careful notes about what you say on that whiteboard over there. So why don't you raise your hand, and Jean will recognize you.
Yes, sir. Second row.
Yeah. I'm Steve Schreiber. I'm the chair of the planning board, but I'm not speaking for the planning board. I'm also an architect and a professor at UMass. So I'm here to challenge this idea that the parking lot should stay, that the parking lot is basically a repaving effort, because it's probably the most important corner of Amherst is where the beginning of that parking lot is. It's the front lawn of the, dang, hold it like an ice cream cone. Yeah. It's the front lawn to the city hall, town hall. And, yeah. Am I going to get pushed out the window? Yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah. Anyway, I hope that one of the three schemes really challenges this idea, A, that there should be a parking lot, B, that if there is parking, that it has to be accessed on the common itself. So really that drive for the common is duplicating what already happens on Main Street, just one car over. So if you look at those, if you look at the aerial photos, the northernmost cars could be accessed right off of Main Street. So that leaves only half the cars that would even need to be accessed. And if you were to block off that parking, there's other clever ways of accommodating that parking. So that's my pitch, is to think of this not as two projects. the common and the parking lot, but to think of it as really restoring a common as it used to be at one time.
Can we get the common back on the?
Oh, yeah. Picture or a plan?
The plan, the aerial image.
One that shows, yes.
Here you go. Super. Okay, thank you. I think that's a great start. I think those are excellent comments. And, you know, we have an opportunity for that third scheme to do exactly as you suggest. We have an opportunity, even with the other two schemes, to reimagine even the parking area. And we've already taken note that, you know, maybe the footprint is overly large relative to the number of cars that are accommodated. Maybe there doesn't have to be an entrance from North Pleasant Street, and some pedestrian zone can be grabbed back in that location. But I think you're absolutely spot on. At the end of the day, and it may be a bit of a challenge, but we want that to feel like it is connected, certainly, to the green space itself, and not a parking lot that fell into outer space, totally unrelated to the North Common. So thank you for that. Yes, ma'am?
My name is Sharon Judge, and I'd just like to respond to that. The challenge is going to be to keep in mind that we have to accommodate people who attend Grace Church and activities at the inn for parking and for, you know, the ability to get in and out easily. I go to Grace Church, that's why I'm thinking, oh yeah, well, hopefully we'll consider that in the plan.
Thank you. We're certainly going to, you know, try to seek that balance. And we've had an earlier meeting where it was people were arriving late. Now, you know, the university, the students have left for the summer, and Amherst, the students have probably left as well. But we had a meeting not so long ago where we started about 10 or 15 minutes late because it was so hard to get parking to come into this very building. So we know that there's a fine line and there's a sweet spot to be found. But we continue to think there may be some opportunity to reduce the square footage that's dedicated to hardscape just to the north of the North Common in the form of that parking area.
And events at the Lord
I-
Jeff Inn. I just wanted her to add events at the Lord Jeff, because that's also a great gathering spot, you know.
Right, and we have a business community that also thinks that every space in this geographic area is precious as well. So, yeah, thank you. Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, how are you thinking of dealing with the grading and the erosion? Would there be like terracing, and also the idea of whether there would be planter boxes, raised beds, things like that to incorporate flowers as well as the trees?
So I think that, you know, some subtle terracing is something that should be considered. And I think you would want to consider materials that are maybe more connected to the center and more traditional, and maybe more connected to a common that was set aside a couple 100+ years ago as well. So the wood timber probably doesn't make a lot of sense in that space. It doesn't really seem to complement the North Common at all. But I think you don't want it to be an overriding, jarring visual add-on to the space as well. So, you know, maybe there's some potential through a series of lower interventions that allowed the grade to step a little bit and help to enhance ADA compliance as well. So in one of those diagrams, we showed something that was somewhat serpentine. Now, it's possible to make a straight through too, but to do something serpentine that's ADA compliant. So I think, you know, fieldstone or some other suitable type of low-lying, easy-on-the-eye type of an intervention would be a good way to look at stepping the grade. And then stormwater, and it has to be in concert with the approach to stormwater management as well. And Mike, you feel free to jump in too when this.
And just to talk about the planting boxes, we've already heard that there's an interest in was it the gardening club, coming back, and to include water access, so an access to a hose bib or a spigot to water the plants, as an amenity that would keep that happening there. So.
Next question, yes, sir. You came very well prepared.
I did come prepared. Whoa! I can hold this 3 miles. I can speak loud enough without this, but I have a different view of this common and the process, because I was on the Historical Commission. We started talking about it, and everyone I talked to about it pretty much had cloth ears. They didn't want to hear what I had to say. So thankfully, Andy doesn't have the gavel tonight, so he can't silence me. But I think this is, and it's one thing that's mentioned tonight, is that this is the heart of the town. And I think everyone agrees to that, right? Well, take a look at the heart. What is the heart? It's a parking lot, right? That's what the heart of our town is. It's a parking lot. I know Amherst loves its vehicles, it loves its SUVs and its minivans and a few Priuses here and there, but the centerpiece of our town is a parking lot. And I think this is an opportunity to take this space that includes everything within that purple line and reimagine it. Just don't consider anything that's there now as being gospel. The trees that create the canopy prevent people from really enjoying that park. No one wants to go in. It doesn't feel good. All you have to do is walk down the street to Sweetser Park. It feels really good. You have to ask yourself, why does it feel so good at Sweetser Park? So what I would do is just reimagine the whole space and think about it as a wonderful, creative, new space that would attract people not only from town to visit it, but from other places as well. They could come to town, they could get a sandwich, they could go to the theater, they could come here afterwards or before, spend some time, it'd be very comfortable, it'd be like Sweetser Park. So that's the friendlier part of what I'm going to say. The second part isn't so friendly, so I'm going to show a few images.
Do you want me to hold the boards?
Oh, that would be great. Mike Hankey of formerly, I guess it's formerly Precinct 9 at this point. So as you can see here, and one of the slides that was showed earlier up on the screen shows the green space that is owned by the town. And most people don't even think of the common as extending south of Route 9, but it does, and it goes all the way down to in front of the gymnasium at Amherst College. Does anyone here realize that that was part of the public space? Yeah, it's there. So this is just reiterating the fact that this whole thing should be considered as part of the plan, and just wipe it clean. Now, in saying that, there may be some specimen trees, and Alan can better address that may be valuable and beautiful, and we need to maintain. So that's one of the things. So when I looked at this, I wasn't thinking about it in terms of a design, but I thought about it as parameters. Utilize the whole space, maybe create some additional parking along this side, but look at this whole green space together, because over the years, this parking lot is encroached, and the farmer's market is encroached on this green space. It's slow and subtle, and people don't take much note to it, but it's been encroaching. We're getting more concrete and more asphalt. Sorry about this. Another approach has a head-in parking on this side and down this side, and gives you a little more space to give a foreground to the town hall. One of the things this space could do is really act as a picture frame for the town hall, which it doesn't really do now. And then thirdly, the most aggressive and probably unrealistic is to close Boltwood in one direction here. We'll close it down to the exit from the parking lot to formally attach this to physically connect it to Town Hall. That's probably the most radical. So thank you for that. The one thing which I do have a problem with, and I don't have a problem with this firm at all because I really like what they're doing on the recreation front in town. I've been to the meetings. They're doing a really excellent job. But when this process was originally started, I kept saying over and over again that this space is extremely important. And all you have to do is walk across the river to the town no one wants to talk about, our sister town, Northampton, and take a look at the public space that they created. I've been there a number of times. That space is fantastic. Yes, Pulaski Park, thank you. People love it. They just love to go there. There's a water feature, so you hear sound. There are people playing. There are people doing all kinds of things in that park. I don't know what they do after hours, but during the day, it's a positive family place. So when we were originally working on this, and it never proceeded while I was on the commission, my concept for it was to create a limited competition, which would have brought in 3 different firms, landscape architecture firms, hire them to do a conceptual design, and then choose one to go forward with. I'm a designer myself. I'm not a landscape architect. I'm not that kind of designer. I wouldn't compete for this. But when I compete, especially on a statewide or national level, I'm competing against a lot of other really good firms. So I think we missed the boat here with that opportunity to create something truly special for our town. And I don't have any problem with this firm competing, but that's not going to happen now. And hindsight is 2020. I wish my fellow members of the Historical Commission back then would have listened, but they didn't. And I'm just hoping this is not a missed opportunity to do something truly wonderful as a centerpiece for our town. Believe me, the businesses that surround this park would love it. They would absolutely love it. Thank you.
Quite all right. If we can take them, I think that's terrific. That's totally fine. We'll do that. And I don't think we are interested in missing this opportunity either. And we agree that it is a tremendous opportunity. And we'd like to think that we're also very up to the task with our designers in our studio and our ability to help facilitate a dialogue with the community. And this is one viewpoint, and we're going to hear lots of different viewpoints. So, you know, the trick always is to find that sweet spot, that place, that's sort of a blend of the various viewpoints that are being represented. I'm not, and he's not, and the folks that make up our design studio are not beholden to parking lots, I have to tell you. But we also live in a real world, and we're going to take, you know, our direction from staff and from a whole group of residents that come to speak at these forums. And we'll be as innovative and daring as this community would like us to be. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Yes, back row, this gentleman.
Hello. All right, I'll stand up. Thank you. Sure. My name is Ben. I'm an Amherst native, and I'm also a landscape architecture student at UMass. So I have a few things to say. First off, I would just like to mention last year we had a design studio that really focused on the entire Amherst Commons, including the North Commons with a big focus there. So there are, there's probably 10, we had 10 students in that studio who all created designs for this space. So maybe at some point I could try to pass those along to Chris or something like that. And we all, for the record, were not operating under the assumption that the parking lot would be kept. So those would be 10 examples of the space without the parking lot. So having grown up in Amherst, I would like to say, like, this is where is it? The North Commons is a wonderful place to hang out as a child with your family as you're going downtown and stuff like that. And I always look at the boxes around those big trees. Those were like the funnest little play structures ever. But now I look at it now, and it's like there really should be more opportunities for play in that area. And again, to mention Pulaski Park, they did a great job of putting these really cool, like, wooden structures that both protect the tree and are really fun to play on. And I think there's an opportunity to really increase play opportunities and protect the trees, and kind of this kind of whole shift towards natural play is really important to capitalize on. And then lastly, as a grad student at UMass, I do take the bus a lot, and one thing I would like to mention is that's a really common bus stop, and it's really scary and uncomfortable place to wait. So I would implore you to address that and just make it a more exciting and comfortable place to wait for the bus. So those are my recommendations.
Super. Thanks very much. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. The striped blouse.
Hi, my name is Allison Curfey, and I just wanted to make a comment. When you said something like Hi, can you hear me now? I'm not sure it's on, actually. It is? Oh. Got it. It's a trick. It is a trick. My name is Allison Curfey, and I just wanted to respond to something you said about how the key is to find that sweet spot, and the words you used was to blend, some of the different ideas. And I just wanted to respond that I have to say one of my biggest fears is that I think it's great to listen to different viewpoints and to evaluate them, but I don't want there to be such a blending and watering down of the viewpoints that there is no vision and no point of view. I think that one of the things I love about Pulaski Park in Northampton is that it has a distinct point of view, and that makes it comfortable and desirable to go there.
Okay, I think that's a great comment. So thank you for that. And hopefully, that right spot is a spot where we've done our best to listen to folks, but the plan is really representing something that's innovative and representing the majority of the viewpoints that we've heard at these interactions. So yes, let me go way far back right, and then I'll come up front here, okay?
Pat Church. I'm actually the mommy of the Amherst Peace Vigil. So I think that you shouldn't come here and think about our common when the students aren't here, and when it's not a Saturday where an event is going on, and when the church is filling up or letting out. We have the vigil on the northwest corner, and it's been there since 1979. There's a plaque from an earlier vigil from the Vietnam War era. And we've had conversations with the prior select board chair and other people and we saw it on the list, that the vigil is not forgotten about this. I would like to talk to somebody at some point, or somebody could text me about some thoughts about another plaque for the current vigil. And we have someone who would like to would like to have a bench put up for their former member of the Peace Vigil. So there are some things that the Peace Vigil is very focused on. Having said that, being on the vigil in all weather and from 12 to 1 every Sunday, it's really interesting. Right now we're in the mode where we tell people to watch their step. People fall in front of us or come very close to it, and it really can't wait till this is done. I mean, I've been saying this at town meeting, and I've called the DPW about it. The town should really be careful about this, okay? So that's a concern. I believe that living a block away, I use the parking in both lots. I think the one near the town hall is needed because you need short-term parking to get in and out of there to conduct your business. I can walk over from my house. I live on South Prospect Street, but you need to be here and see that on Saturday, the heart of the town is the south parking lot. it draws people from all over. And because there isn't as much travel at that time of the day, they park all over, including up the street near my house, all around to go to that. It's a really important location for a really important event all summer, okay? As I hope it doesn't, the outline doesn't change a lot, because I don't like the idea of changing Boltwood. I don't think it'll fly. Because if you want people to come around to that north parking lot from Boltwood, it means they would have to go through a light and then pile into the traffic, turning right to go down Main Street, and then taking another turn. I just don't think that's a good scenario. I'm sure I'll think of more.
Okay, well, we'd like to hear it if you do, and thank you for that. And I might ask a question too, and maybe before we break, you can respond to it, or after. Maybe to describe some of the things that would make that space feel more comfortable where the peace vigil occurs. So I'm assuming at that corner there's a lot of activity right there, including vehicular activity. Yeah, okay. So visibility is really important, and we've talked about that a lot internally. It's the most visible site in the common, so it's important to be there geographically because you get the most traffic coming by. But the space needs to be more comfortable for those who gather in it, is what I'm hearing. Okay, thank you. And I overlapped, I guess, by 2 years. I graduated in 1981 from UMass, probably the same program that this young gentleman did. So I got to experience that firsthand, and certainly the Common for 4 years as well. I said I was coming up here, yes.
Hi, Erica Zikas. I want to second a lot of what I've heard tonight from so many in the room. I really feel that the town hall being fronted by a parking lot that, if we're going to call it the heart or the gateway of town, feels like there's an opportunity there to rethink it. And in one of your kind of schematic diagrams, you identified kind of civic space, and I like that a lot. And I want to encourage us to think about space for the arts, be it formal and sanctioned or impromptu performance. There's a kind of creating spaces where those kinds of things can happen is one of the things that's really important to me. And then something else I heard tonight that I want to second is that this parcel, it's small, it's special, it's intimate. It doesn't have to be all things. If we think of it as a continuum, and knowing that the south portion of the common is also there and is a big open green space, that I think, that kind of thinking, it's not a standalone piece. It exists as a continuum.
Super. Thanks very much for that. Yes, why don't we go to this gentleman, and then I'm going to go to the woman in the back row who's been very patient.
Ed Wilford. I want to speak for the trees. The North Common, as it stands now, is the shady place. The South Common and Sweetser Park are the sunny spots. I wonder whether we need to preserve part of this park, this common and park system as a shady place.
Okay, I think that's a great comment, and clearly, I noted at the outset that there were people gathered under the shade of the trees this evening. And I don't think we want for everything to sound like a compromise, but there's clearly some great trees out there that can continue to provide value to the space. But if we're really going to explore some opportunities, then maybe part of some of the schematics is looking at removing some of the trees, particularly if they're not great species, if they're now considered invasive, if they're in only marginal condition, and if it creates some other unique opportunities out there. So that's my initial reaction. Please, Mike.
And I just want to add to that we're thinking about this space for use for the next 30 years, for the next 100 years, some of these trees were planted 100 years ago, and so, there's a kind of a lifespan of a tree that's much different than a human, and I think that we are going to be looking at, replacing for future shade as well as, preserving the good shade that's out there. I don't think that anyone is on board with expanding and removing everything there. I think it's going to be very much about continuing the process.
I want to apologize for that noise. I spoke with the person from Amherst Media, and she. Other mics are not portable.
This, people would have to come forward if you don't mind. Would you mind?
She's quite mobile. She could do it.
That sounded like a heartbeat. Well, thank you. My name is Adrienne Terizzi, and while I won't repeat some of the sentiments I've heard here this evening, my issue is that next year, Amherst will reach its 260th year of being. And I wondered if you can explain to us how your particular group came up with both embracing the historic elements of the town common as represented by that beautiful fountain that's been covered for many a decade, yet embracing a lot of what is the very energetic and new vibrancy of Amherst in the 21st century. So my feeling is, how do you embrace both our historic past and welcome us and push us towards the future?
So I hope I don't have to answer that in its entirety this evening. We're here to introduce ourselves and the project and listen to folks, but so that's a challenge, right? And I'd almost like to put the question back at you, but of course you're asking me, and we're the designers and we work on historic assets. But clearly, what we would hope is from what we hear tonight is that we can come back and introduce some schematic designs that speak to exactly that. And you know what? I don't have a sense here tonight as to how much in this space, this 37,000 square foot space, is sacred, and how much of it is in play for discussion and conversation and reimagination. And I have to say, based on some of the reading we've done and getting up to speed, it seems like there's a little bit more interested beyond protecting the trees, which I totally get, in coming up with some innovative new look to this place. We're hearing a lot about the parking lot, and the parking lot not really being off limits in regard to either reducing its footprint, or multiple people have said eliminating it. So that's a conversation that goes beyond us, because I think losing X number of parking spaces is something that would be a challenge to the town, and they would want to try to figure out what's an answer to perhaps replenish those spaces. And we are becoming more mobile. People are Ubering and Lyfting, and people are riding their bicycles more than ever. But we've been here enough, and we've observed enough to see that there still seems to be some stress and some pressure relative to the number of parking spaces that are available to support the myriad of events and institutions that surround the common. So more to come, and if you would like to add to that, please do.
I would, because there's a little hidden reason for my question as well. On behalf of the 250th Anniversary Committee, probably the longest serving 9-year committee in the history of Amherst, I was asked to represent that committee in the years going forward with the additional funds we had to have a 250th anniversary bench. And on behalf of the chairs of that committee, and one of them was Stan Zomek, whom you all recognize, and Barry Roberts. They asked me to hang in there, Adrian, and make certain that the 250th anniversary bench appear at the North Common in your design plans going forward. So I thank you. Please remember that.
We will, and I trust that I'll have you to remind me if I don't. So thank you for that.
I've been told that the microphone has had its battery changed, so that might help. So
Okay,
I'll try
super.
to pass it around.
Okay, front row over here. ma'am.
Hi, I'm Lois Barber. First of all, I want to just say how I am so happy to hear your open frame of mind about how to deal with this space. It's so refreshing that you're thinking of doing away with the parking lot and blocking traffic, closing part of Bowood. And I'm not sure how I feel about any of this yet, but it's just so refreshing to have a clean slate that we could really think about. And just personally, things that I care about most really are the trees also. And those big old shade trees, it is where I go. It's cool, it's refreshing. The person who said that they didn't like that part, I would just be on the other side of that issue. For me, that's what I want. And if I want to go sit in the sun, I'll go someplace else. So the shade trees are really important. I also know that some of those trees have been planted in honor of people and things. Like I know the Amherst Club planted a beautiful beech tree that must be about 25 years old now. And I smile at it all the time and see how it's growing so beautifully. So just please, if you have to move trees or something, pay attention to that. And I also I love gardens. And I think that this could be a space that could be have more gardens in it. Instead of just trees and grass, that it could have bushes and flowering plants, and it could have shade plants around below the trees, hostas and beautiful flowering things in the spring, and could have some winter berries, plants with red berries, and just think of it as an all year round. I know it's not a park, but I don't know where garden fits into this. But somewhere I would like to see more different kinds of plants and bushes and things like that. And also, I would think it would be appropriate to be using Goshen stone, what I call Goshen stone, what so many people in New England have for stone walls around their gardens and their houses. And if that's at all possible, it's so beautiful and friendly, and it's appropriate for this environment. So there's just a few ideas.
Okay, super. Thank you very much for that. Right behind, next row. We'll work our way back, I guess.
Chris Riddle's my name. Excuse me. Let's see, two related points, I guess. One was I was taken by the early plan by Frederick Law Olmsted, who has a good reputation. And I like the curvilinear quality of the plan that he had, and it was nice to see. I hadn't seen these before, photographs that Chris had put up of remnants of the curvilinear design that appeared fairly recently in recent history. I had no idea that we were curvilinear that recently. And I think so. That's one point. The second point is related. It seems that there's a need to master plan at least the entire common in the process of doing that. Is it off?
Hello? 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 I guess.
All right. Okay. Oh, that's much better. Was it still going? Yeah, it's still going. I would encourage us to, in designing the North Common and the parking, or that rectangle that I see there, that the entire common, at least down to the Route 9 intersection, to the Route 9 boundary, that it be master planned at least to work with this. And I think that, and maybe it could incorporate the plans that are currently being talked about for a performance space or performance venue. Somehow it seems to me that ought to be, the whole area ought to be thought of as a piece. Maybe we only implement the north portion of it, but I think we should master plan the entire common.
Okay, thank you for that. Next row back.
Yes, hello, William Kazin. I'm here as a member on behalf of the Amherst Public Art Commission, and I was happy to see that the original comments said include art and sculpture. So we want to suggest, if not urge, that public art be part of the project, part of the process. We're happy to help in any way we can. That's what we do. So we're here for you, and we'd love to see relational art, perhaps, which could include a performance space or more permanent memorial types of projects. Lots of possibilities. We have lots of great ideas. The other thing I would just ask, which might be a better question for Ms. Brestrup or Mr. Bockelman, is why is the select board deciding on the final shape of this park and not the new council? So I don't know if we can answer that now, but just a question that's in my mind.
I'd say that's a question for Mr. Bockelman if he chooses to answer it.
So the select board will be in office when this decision has to be made. By the time the council gets up and running, we would lose another year for this. So the select board is very experienced. It's in their purview. Had we done this 6 months earlier, it would have been in their purview. I think it makes perfect sense for the select board to make the decision.
Yes, a woman in the back row.
So not speaking for the select board, but my name is Alyssa Brewer and I am a member of the select board, and that was very carefully done in terms of timing. If you have desires to make it take longer, which pretty many of the ideas discussed tonight would make it take longer, then it's a possibility that it would go out of this work cycle, which would not make lots of people happy, but might make other people working on this happy. So that is something to be thought about, because if we're going to stick with this timeline, then yeah, it's a select board decision. If we're not going to stick with the timeline, then it's a different decision, and that's a number of other things that play into that, and I don't think we could argue it's written in stone, although Mr. Bachman will probably throw something at me for saying that. Two other things I wanted, three, that I just want to really, this is Amherst, it's mostly comments, not questions. In terms of Pulaski Park, okay, everybody loves Pulaski Park, I get it. Pulaski Park didn't have parking spaces, okay? You're asking us, when you say, be creative, be amazing, and I love all the people personally in the room who said that, at the same time, we don't have any place to put those parking spaces. I can't imagine the current form of government being all the different parts, saying, let's give up those parking spaces and we'll find a way for them someplace else. Not saying that wouldn't be a nice future goal, that we could find a different place to put them, but in the meantime, in terms of the businesses there, in terms of town hall, there just isn't another place to put them. Northampton's in a very different position when it comes to parking, as you can see by the amazing parking lot that they have had below Pulaski Park, which so many people can get up to in addition to all their other places. The other quick thing I wanted to mention is associated with putting information out for the rest of the public who couldn't be here tonight. As we know, in Amherst, a lot of people are out of town right now, and a lot of people will continue to be out of town right up until the time this decision is made in September. So if we could get up on the website a really tiny version of that picture, which I find not at all useful in terms of talking about this. I want to see pictures with ideas of paths and things like looking at those trees. I like those trees, but that's not telling me anything. So please, let's get some other stuff up for people to be reacting to. Even here tonight, we could have been reacting more to it. And then finally, in terms of process, in terms of all these meetings, and you mentioned going back to the public, going to the Historical Commission, going to Leisure Services Commission, not the department, but the Leisure Services Commission, and the Select Board. So what I need to understand moving forward as we wrap up tonight is whether or not you're planning to do settings like this that you expect all those people to come to, or if you're also going to be going to Historical Commission. Therefore, it's on Historical Commission's agenda. Therefore, people who subscribe to that, who are particularly interested in the Historical Commission's work, or the Public Art Commission's work, et cetera, can go to that. Because if you're just expecting all of us to show up at a meeting like this, it's not going to happen. So.
Okay, thank you. So we'll defer that question to Chris.
So Weston and Sampson is contracted with us for a certain number of meetings. I don't think they're going to be going to all of those meetings that Ms. Brewer talked about. We're going to have to rely on staff to do some of that. So when Weston and Sampson comes up with a plan, staff will bring it around to the Design Review Board and the Historical Commission and other boards and committees. possibly Weston and Sampson would accompany us to some of those meetings.
And we're certainly willing to do exactly that, Chris. Thank you. Yes, gentleman back row. And then you're next.
Thank you, John Kuhn. A few comments have been made, but I have 4 comments that I'd like to make. One is we heard that this process has been going on for 5 years, but to my mind, this process is really just starting tonight. And I see that you are going to have a final design in 2 months. And that just seems like an incredibly tight timeline for something this important. So I wonder how you're going to do that, or how you're going to get enough information from everybody to really make that timeline work. The second comment is about trees. I think there's a happy medium here. I think there's some beautiful trees there, but I think there are too many trees there. I think you can create a space that has shade, but also is bright enough that allows other shrubs and flowers and gardens and things like that. So I hope that you find a happy medium there. The third comment is parking, and I am going to side with those who have said that I think you should look at eliminating the parking at the north end of the common. That's not to say we don't have a parking problem in town, but the north end of the common is not the place to solve it. And Frederick Law Olmsted is probably rolling over in his grave knowing that part of his common got turned into a parking lot. And I think this is our front yard, and if there's any parking there, it should be very limited. My last comment is just the word beautiful. When I travel, and I'm sure anybody here that travels around the country or around the world, you see many beautiful open spaces, commons, parks, piazzas. Beautiful is never a word that I've used for our common, and I hope it is when this process is done.
Thank you very much. Yes, right here.
Meg Rosa, I'm actually the chair of the LSSE Commission. So my husband and I went on a date Saturday night to Pulaski Park, walking around Northampton, whatever. Yeah, I'm going to Pulaski Park. There's specific things that I liked about it, though. The lighting. There's a section where there's small tables, there's string lights above you. It's soft light. It's really, really nice space, and it's intimate. So something like that would be great with like small little tables or something. I like the hardscapes where, you have like the big stones that you can sit on in the water features. And there's a rain garden, I believe. That's maybe something we could look at. And just walking areas, being able to walk in the space in different kind of nooks, like just sitting areas where you can be. I like the idea of the gardens and flowers. And one idea that I've had, I think I came up with this like a year or two ago now at a meeting, but we were talking about the art aspects of it, and I was thinking having a giant chessboard, like human size, you have to pick up the pieces, move them around, really interactive, playing, something like that. I think that would be fun. So, all right, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Who's next? Anybody else? Back to the front here.
Hi, I just have a question. What is the purview, if you will, of the Historical Commission in this project?
The Historical Commission and the Leisure Services Commission both supported the request to the Community Preservation Act Committee, which then went to town meeting, and this project received money for the purpose of historical preservation as well as recreation. I'm a little surprised that the representatives didn't come tonight, but there may have been some miscommunication, so I'm going to look into that and encourage them to watch this video, which is being recorded right now. And I wanted to respond to something Mr. Kuhn said. We do have a little bit of flexibility in terms of time from sort of the end of fall to the February bid date. So, there's some opportunity to spend some more time developing design. We're not, we don't absolutely have to march in lockstep. So I think, we'll be talking to Weston and Sampson about that.
We're also going to work with Chris and other staff to make sure that everything is made available on the town website. So tonight's presentation will be available, and as schematic designs evolve and as precedent images are pulled together that kind of represent those schematic designs, all of those will be made available through the town's website as well. So we do want people to participate, even if they're out of town, to the extent that that's practical. Yes, sure.
So now we're on to the double jeopardy round. So the parking on the very top, so actually Mike's drawing showed this, the parking on the very top could be accessed off of Main Street. So everyone's referring to Northampton tonight. And so Northampton is known for its head-end parking, and we have head-end parking on Spring Street. So it can be done. It is done in Amherst. It's done in other towns. So that saves half of the parking there. So that's a simple move. And by doing that, by then getting rid of the entrances to the parking lot, you open up more on-street parking. So pretty soon the parking problem that is perceived can be replaced by other forms of parking. And we are at the end of a parking obsessed urban planning. So in other words, it's like building the horse stables 100 years ago. We're just not going to be doing that anymore. So why do it now? The other thing I want to mention is the bus stop. So I too am a frequent bus rider. And in a way, there's too many things going on. And I hope he doesn't hit me over the head, but that's the only bus stop that I am aware of that doesn't have a pair across the street. Its pair is actually 3 blocks down across from the Congregational Church. So I've never really understood why those two aren't paired, but if that were paired, then that would take some of the pressure off that particular point.
Okay, good point. Thank you. Yes, sir. Back left, Chris.
Hi, Jeremy Austin. I just wanted to talk about it. I own a business right across the street from the North Common. Look at it all day long, have for 10 years, and all my childhood. It is not beautiful. It has elements that could be enhanced and brought out. There are some nice trees. There are some trees that are not thriving. That's a separate issue. I trust that will be worked out. But I would like to see, as you look at this picture, you see a third of it is a parking lot. There's no excuse for that. In all of your drawings, which were all nice about the Worcester Common, the Boston Common, you notice there were no cars in any of those pictures. And that's what we liked about it. You look at the umbrellas, oh, the patio seating, oh, this is wonderful. But there were no cars, there was no parking lot. This is the center of town, it should not be a parking lot. There are approximately 36 spaces. It's not insurmountable. Looking at Mike's drawings, putting angle-in parking along Boltwood Avenue, the only addition I would say would be back in reverse angle parking because it's much safer for bikers, and that's what progressive cities are doing these days. Vancouver, Asheville, you name it, all these other cities. And I would continue that along South Pleasant Street all the way up along the Common. You would quickly get to 36 spaces. You approximately double the spaces of parallel parking. Parallel parking in studies show that 20% of people will just drive right on by, which is not good for business and is very inefficient. So I think the parking problem really doesn't have to be a problem. Let's use this park, come up with a creative idea, use the beautiful trees. Everyone likes a mature tree, even landscape designers and planners, they like them too. Nobody's cutting them down. So I think we can work on something and create something. We can rip up, we can plant over this parking lot and, tear up the parking lot, So I think there's a lot of potential here, and I think we need to look at it as a green space and not as a parking lot.
Okay, great. Thank you. Please.
there has been a lot of talk about trees, and we do have our tree warden here, so we may want to invite him to make some comments about the trees.
Sure.
Oh, he's got his own microphone.
I think everyone in the room's been doing a pretty good job talking about trees.
Maybe
Can you
not.
hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, I'll get really close. Again, I appreciate everyone thinking about the trees on the common. And, as a common, that's why it falls under the purview of the tree warden, because it's part of the public way. And it is, again, not a park. So I always go back and forth between the space. My crew also maintains the space, tries to maintain the space. And it is really overused often. And because of the deep shade, we do have the runoff that's taking place, and the desire lines that people have created over the years. A lot of our maple trees are suffering from the soil compaction, lack of nutrients, and there's also just a general decline in maple trees right now going on in the region. So a lot of our maple trees are not healthy around town, and it's true on the common as well. The Mary Maple, we're going to have a really tough decision to make about the Mary Maple in a couple of years. So I just want people to be aware of that. The beech trees that were planted probably about 25 years ago are doing pretty well. They're nice. They're growing. And I look forward to protecting those trees and keeping them healthy. The large linden tree, a couple of them there, are also very healthy trees, worthy of protection. The other Norway maples are also struggling. There's a tulip poplar tree on the southwest corner that's struggling, but it's still alive. It's doing okay. So I love the idea of creating more green space, integrating stormwater into our hardscapes in our green spaces, utilizing that to absorb and reduce and slow down the stormwater. I don't know if that answers your question about the tree health. But.
Okay. This gentleman and then the woman in the front row. Actually,
This might be a question for a DPW, actually. In the late 1870s, large reservoirs were put in the area where the parking, the north end parking was. I don't know what has been done with those, whether there is a hydrological barrier there, or whether there's some other remains that would make it more difficult to otherwise replace the parking with greenery. But I know it's not generally known, so I want to.
So any knowledge about any remnants of some subsurface structures below that?
Actually, we haven't come across any plans that show that. So we don't really have any information on that. We would probably have to do test pits to see what's there.
Yes, just in the 1870s, just before the big fire, and they weren't too efficient, they weren't available, and when the big fire of 1879 that destroyed Merchants Row happened, the town finally got the idea that it would be good to pipe water from Pelham, and then the reservoirs were not needed anymore. But they were dug down, they were dug and encased in brick from what historical records I've been able to find. And that's the area. There were two of them. I don't know how much of the space they were occupying. It's one of those mysteries.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know what may have occurred in recent decades out there as far as excavation through that parking lot, but You probably had some light pole foundations that have been installed, and
Yeah, I think as far as excavation, we've only done trenching for conduit.
Yeah, okay.
Water line.
yeah, so a few feet to 3 feet down.
Yeah, 4 feet.
Okay.
Most.
All right. Well, we'll keep it in mind. Thank you. Yes. This definitely won't reach.
I'm Paul Wackelman, town manager. I just want to, from listening to the room, it seems like what people are saying is to be brave, conceptualize the whole space, don't let the parking lot or the need for parking spaces dictate it. If I think that's what you may be walking away with too, but we also need parking spaces. So if you were given the task of saying, be creative, be bold, make something beautiful, but have no net loss on parking spaces, what would that look like? Is that sort of what people are feeling?
Yeah, I think it's probably possible for us to look at it in a number of different ways, where we retain parking somewhat similar to how it is under current conditions, but then we look at something that maybe realizes some sort of net reduction in parking. And then maybe there's a scheme that eliminates most of the parking, but maybe explores other ways to grab some of that back around the perimeter. So I mean, if you make a decision to go to angled parking, and I like the gentleman who was talking about the back end parking, because that really is sort of the state of affairs with angled parking, which is not favored by transportation engineers, and I'm not one of them. So, that's what you would look at. But I think you want to make sure that, you're not dedicating a similar amount of square footage around the perimeter. And I realize intuitively you're taking away travel ways, so that's a lot of square footage that's probably reduced. But it has to happen in a way that allows all of the other activities that are important around the perimeter of the common to continue to occur. So the bus stop relocation, that's something that could be explored. It's probably beyond the realm of what we've been retained to do, but the town would have the capacity to look at that probably. And then the way these spaces, these whole edges function at South Pleasant Street and Main Street. For instance, South Pleasant Street, I think it has to be looked at very carefully. If you were to, was somebody suggesting maybe back-end parking on South Pleasant? My initial reaction is that could be tricky, based on the amount of traffic on that corridor, based on the terrain and the really dramatic drop in grade right off the back of that 4-foot wide sidewalk. Some vegetation that's located in close proximity. Pardon me? Oh, along the main common. Okay. And I think, Boltwood Avenue is an opportunity. But I guess we want to make sure that it's a good play. And under that sort of a scenario, you're making more contiguous green space, because in theory you're taking the southern portion of this project area and you're presumably expanding green space a little bit north towards the front of Town Hall. Maybe create that opportunity where you have some vistas of this amazing building that's across green space and not across the roofs of cars. So I don't know, let us explore some things, and let us have some interactions with town staff to see what might be some possibilities in that regard. Yes, please.
So I realize that you are looking at that North Common space. There are other historians in the room that can correct me, but Frederick Olmsted, this was not our common. The common extended way to the South Common and further south to the Amherst College area. So I'm going to ask you probably a way out of the box question. The Spring Street lot, where we have approximately 36 cars right now, that's a cut through that didn't exist in the original common. And is it too far out to consider that their area be an extension of a future thinking of a re-envisioned North common and moving parking elsewhere?
I think so. I think you're reinforcing some comments that have been made already that were asking us to consider the removal of that parking in that location. And I would think that removal of that parking would be to the benefit of additional green space. So I think what you're saying, unless I'm missing the point, is in concert with what Mike has said and numerous other people have mentioned in that regard. Chris?
I think what Adrian was suggesting was eliminating the parking that is the extension of Spring Street that cuts the North Common from the South, or the main Common. And in my mind, well, for one thing, the scope of Weston and Sampson's work does not include anything that goes south of the North Common area. They were really asked to focus on the North Common and the parking lot that's right north of it. I would also say that the Spring Street parking lot is well loved and used as the farmers market gathering space on Saturday mornings. So I think that would involve a whole other conversation about whether the farmers market could be relocated or located onto a green space there. So I guess what I'm saying is perhaps the town could explore that in the future, but for the purposes of Weston and Sampson's project that they're working on, that's probably out of the scope of their work.
Yes, front row again.
I also was really glad to hear you earlier on say that you're thinking forward 100 years, someone said. And I wondered about the maintenance of everything that, this fabulous place that you and we are all going to create. And you also showed photographs of the deteriorating common right now, probably due to lack of some maintenance plan from the people who created it, or the lack of money or budgeting priorities. And I wondered if your plans for 100 years or 50 years, or in addition to just building it, but to caring for it, like when trees might have to be replaced and how much that might cost. And if the $1 million budget possibly includes money being saved for its maintenance over some future time period, or at least that there's some estimate of what it's going to cost. Like, say there are gardens and bushes and plantings. Well, people are going to need to be paid probably to take care of them. So I would just like to see a plan that looks forward.
Okay, no, that's certainly fair. I think the funding that's been allocated so far is capital dollars, and therefore implementing the actual construction of the improvements. We can certainly help inform the town and work with the town to identify what, on an annual basis, the additional operational costs would be associated with maintaining it. And we also try to design things in a way that are sustainable and reflect the fact that municipal budgets are not limitless. I think it's clear to say that you would want to have a more robust approach to maintenance on this property once the plan is implemented, but it certainly doesn't have to bankrupt the town. And in fairness, right now, the assets are so deteriorated that it's hard to maintain it at a good level of repair. So it's that time where a capital project really needs to correct some of the flaws that are associated with the grade, the dense shade, the traffic patterns, and so forth. Red shirt, the gentleman in the red shirt.
Hi, my name is Steve Judge. Two thoughts and one question. I'm intrigued by the notion of the angled parking on Boltwood. I think that's a possibility. I'm scared of angled parking on South Pleasant because I find that's one of the most obnoxious things about Northampton on a busy street. But on Boltwood, perhaps it's something you could do. And so I would encourage you to think about that. But I would also encourage you to try to stay net zero impact on the number of parking spaces. At least for the time being, the next 10 or 15 years, I think we're going to need those parking spaces. And so that would be one thought. Second thought is I want to keep as much tree cover as possible on this part of the common. We have a nice, bright, sunny southern common. One of the great things about this common is the trees. You don't have to save every tree. You can't do that, but it's really nice to have that feature to that part of the common. And my question is, I love the Frederick Law Olmsted serpentine walks. They're beautiful, they're pleasant, they're relaxing, right? And it's really a nice feature. But I also know that human beings will make their own paths. And if they'll take the straightest or the most directly down the slope. And so I wonder if you've studied what the slope is, what's the natural, what paths have been created, and can you use that when you create whatever paths and walkways you create? Because people will ignore those beautiful serpentine paths if they don't, if it's not a convenient way for them to move. So that's my question. How do you think that through?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I mentioned earlier that even if we had some pathways that were more serpentine, more Olmsted-ish or Olmsted-like, you might have to give options for that person that's really in a hurry and is just going to run a straight line. Either that, or you have to deploy other, interventions in the landscape that make it kind of hard to take that straight line. Like the introduction of low retaining walls, or meaningful plantings that are sustainable at the ground level, and so on and so forth. So I think that's something that has to be really carefully considered. We've been out here multiple times. We've observed traffic patterns. We haven't been here every time of year. We rely on you folks too to report to us where we're misinterpreting. But I think the major moves we have to try to accommodate in a pretty efficient way to avoid degradation of the landscape on a going forward basis. So I think that's a great comment. And it's Boltwood Avenue, I think, it's an interesting concept too. It's in a lot of ways, it's a really unique edge to the common. It's attractive, it's comfortable, it's out of the fray. And you have maybe 6 or 8 parallel parking spaces. So your relationship to the North Common and Town Hall is interrupted by 6 or 8 vehicles. And if you introduce angle parking, it could be interrupted by 16 vehicles. It's just an observation. It's one of the things that's nice about that edge of the common at present time. So, but thank you for that. Yes, sir. Oh.
I think we're going to try to use this microphone. I'll just walk around with it.
Thank you. I actually had a question directed back at Mr. Snow and something he mentioned. I love the Merry Maple. I mean, it's this huge specimen tree, and it's merry. It's got lights on it, and it's really become a symbolic center for the North Common. But if it's a tree that's in jeopardy, which I thought I heard you say, and we're spending $1 million centered around a tree like that may not last, could you talk a little bit more about when you said we had a tough decision to make in a couple of years?
Sure. So the Merry Maple is a Norway maple. It's one of the largest Norway maples I've ever seen, which seems to love that location. I'm not really sure how old it is. They grow very fast, and they tend to have very dense shade. And they tend not to live very long because they're quick growers. So it is, we had some branch failure about a year ago. A large branch failed, went in leaf off, and it made us aware of some decay in the main stem where all the branch major leaders join together on the trunk. So there's nothing I can really do about the decay, and the tree has been cabled in the past. Part of the problem with lighting the Merry Maple is that the people who put the lights on find branches to be in their way, and so they constantly prune the tree to put the lights on. And so what we're ending up with a tree is called lion's tailing, where you remove all the inner growth and you're left with just branch green leaves on the outer branches. And that makes the tree even more prone to wind damage because all the wind load is coming on the tips of the tree. And so we have serious root compaction. The tree is not thriving. It is slowly in decline. We have decay. You can go out and look at the tips and the upper crown. Now's a good time to do it. You can see that there's a lot of fine dead twigs. And that's the beginning of this maple decline that we're seeing that takes a couple of years to take out some of our bigger maple trees. So it is a conversation. We're going to monitor the decay, but it is a question, for us, and ultimately the tree warden and select board. Do we want to keep this tree if we're going to be doing a significant amount of impact to the root zone of the tree? So.
This doesn't reach. Here, I'll hold the mic for you this time. Okay.
Thank you. I think one important point that came out here, and several people raised it, is that this is a very important place. And I think the town, in part, has underestimated the importance of this place. Also, I want to caution people that $1 million is nothing. That is nothing to do something truly special here. Part of this grant is to repave the parking lot. So I think we're kidding ourselves if we think we're going to get a brand new wonderful space that's going to be successful. Not for $1 million. It's just not going to happen. In my experience, $1 million would go just like that. So I just want you to be forewarned. My biggest fear about this project is that it's going to get compromised and it's going to be plain vanilla. And it's just a missed opportunity. So, I don't know if there's anything to be done about that, but I think a lot of people are aware of it now, and that this is a really important space to our town. It's the heart of our town. So that's it.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments, or anyone else want to say anything? Well, then I would like to thank you all for coming. This has been a very rich evening. We've really learned a lot and heard a lot of different points of view, and we appreciate your sharing them with us. So thank you very much for coming. We have your names and email, and I think Ms. Brewer would like to say something.
Since you did such a great job of having a sign-in sheet, and since people will be away over the summer, is there a way that you can start an email list that tells people when the website has more stuff on it, and when you're planning, as you indicated, to have staff come to Historical Commission, LSSE Commission, et cetera, so people can be actively notified?
Yes, we can certainly prepare a distribution list that will keep people informed about what we're doing, and let people know when we've posted the material on the website. We'd be happy to do that. So thank you very much for coming. This has been a wonderful evening.